Jurors in the case deliberating right now. We're waiting for their verdict. We've been telling you that all morning, but that's the job right now as we keep following this story throughout the hour. Joining us right now, two people who know a lot about what it's like to wait for a verdict. We have in the CNN Center Pate and Tanya Miller. Mr. Pate is a criminal defense attorney, and Ms. Miller is a defense attorney and former federal prosecutor. All right, we've been talking about race here and whether it's an issue and why it's an issue and how. Let me put something on the table. Prosecutors were talking about profiling and why they believe and argue that George Zimmerman was targeting Trayvon Martin because he reminded Zimmerman of black kids wearing hoodies who'd been committing crimes. I mean, that was their theory. They used prior 911 calls. But here's what I want to ask you, Mr. Pate. If race is a part of this trial, why didn't the prosecutors charge George Zimmerman with a law that's on the Florida books called aggravation of crime by selecting victim based on prejudice?
I think that's tough. You're right, Chris. I mean, that charge is available to the state, but it's a tough charge to make. And I don't know that you want to stand in front of a jury and not only accuse George Zimmerman of being a murderer, but being a racist murderer.
But what are you doing, though, Mr. Pate, as the prosecutor, when you're saying, listen to these old 911 calls, not the calls that night, not anything that he said about Trayvon Martin, but what he said in the past about people who look like Trayvon Martin. Aren't they doing it there? If they're doing it there, why not just bring the charge?
Well, I didn't say you should ignore race as the prosecutor, because you do have to suggest to the jury some reason that Mr. Zimmerman is out for Trayvon Martin. If it's racial, if it's because he thinks he's a criminal, there has to be that ill will, that hatred. And for them, that was one way of showing it without overtly calling him a racist. And you'll notice they didn't do that during the trial.
But, Tanya, what's the functional difference? If you're saying the reason George Zimmerman ignored 911 operators, went after this guy, had a loaded weapon, is because he has it out for kids like this, isn't that the message you're sending to the jury and the whole world who's watching this?
Well, I think it's very nuanced. I think what the prosecutor did, and I think they really did the best they could with it, was try to explain to the jury why this happened, why Trayvon Martin looked so suspicious to George Zimmerman, why you can conclude that he had ill will towards Trayvon Martin when he followed him, when he pursued him, and when he made all of these false assumptions about him, without sort of adding that extra layer of proving that this was a racially motivated homicide, that he sought out to kill Trayvon Martin because he was black. I think that would have been adding more of a burden to their case than they needed to.
No, Paige, let me ask you this, because I want to get your take on this, and Tanya, I want to get your take on this as well. Continuing on the vein of charges, where do you stand on the kind of the idea of overcharging? The prosecution has taken quite a bit of heat for maybe not being able to meet the threshold of George Zimmerman being able to be convicted on a second-degree murder charge. So they now have manslaughter that is also an option for the jury. But do you think that they overcharged here, they overstepped, they just couldn't meet that threshold?
I'm certain that they overcharged, but I'm not sure that's a bad strategy. It happens all the time. And prosecutors will go into a courtroom and they'll say, look, we're going to put on our best case, we're going to charge him with the highest, most serious crime that we can, and hopefully, if the jury doesn't see the evidence to support that, they'll say, well, the guy shouldn't walk away. And we've got this other charge available to us. The law supports it. The evidence supports it. So it may not seem fair, but it certainly does happen in trials.
What do you think, Tanya? Do you think it was strategy, or do you think that was a misstep?
Oh, I don't think it was a misstep. I certainly think that it is an appropriate thing to do as a prosecutor. Look, when you're elected to be that prosecutor and to make those charging decisions, you are invested with a certain degree of discretion. Your job is to protect the public. And if you see a crime and you think it warrants the highest charge, notwithstanding the fact that, you know, reasonable people might differ, you're still going to go for that highest charge. Give the jury the opportunity to consider your case, as strong or as weak as it may be, and ultimately make the decision. Prosecutors do it all the time. It's very common.
Yeah, if I can add one thing to that, I actually think it's easier for the prosecution to prove a manslaughter case if they initially charge him with second-degree murder. You know, it's very hard for a jury to simply analyze one charge and say, okay, we're going to convict him of this, or we're going to let him completely go. If you give the jury an option, you're more likely to walk out with a conviction.
I agree.
Appreciate it from both of you, Paige, Tanya. Thank you very much.